I had bookmarked the wallpaper. It had little clouds on it, soft pastels. Not too babyish, but gentle, something I thought our daughter could grow into. I had it all laid out in my notebook, the crib, the rug, even the rocking chair I found secondhand but in perfect condition. The money was set aside, saved slowly and carefully from both our paychecks, tucked into the joint account marked nursery. That was our promise to each other, that we'd make space for this child, together. When I logged in to place the final order, the account balance was $83.74. I stared at the screen. Refreshed the page. Checked the date. It was real. I didn't panic right away. I told myself there had been a mix-up, maybe he moved it somewhere safer, maybe something came up and he forgot to mention it. But when I asked him, his answer came faster than I expected. Oh. Yeah. I gave it to Melissa. I blinked. What? Melissa, he said, still not looking up from his phone. My ex. She was behind on rent or something. Said she needed it. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The baby kicked inside me, a strange, ironic kind of timing. As if she, too, was demanding an explanation. How much did you give her? I asked. All of it, he said, like it was obvious. She needed it more than we do right now. I stood there in the hallway, one hand on the wall for balance, the other wrapped around my belly. That was our nursery fund. I know, he said, finally looking up. But she was in a really bad place. It's not like I gave it to a stranger. She's family. No, I said, quietly. She's not. He scoffed, annoyed now. You're being dramatic. You don't even work anymore. I'm the one bringing in the money. I wasn't sure which part hurt more, the money being gone, or the way he justified it. Like this wasn't our child. Like I was a burden, not a partner. He didn't say it cruelly. That's what made it worse. It was casual. As if the nursery, the baby, my place in this house, were all temporary decorations around his real life. I didn't argue. Not then. I just nodded and went upstairs. The room meant for the nursery was still empty. The paint samples were still taped to the wall. I sat on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, feeling the weight of my own body and the life inside it. There were no receipts, no traces of a decision I had never been a part of. Just absence. A silence where the crib was supposed to be. He came in later, asked if I was still upset. I didn't answer. He told me I needed to stop being so emotional. That Melissa had no one else, that he'd always feel responsible for her. I didn't say what I was thinking. That maybe that responsibility had never ended. That maybe this child, this house, even this marriage, were just the backdrop to a relationship he never truly let go of. I fell asleep that night with my hand on my stomach, whispering to the baby that I would find another way. That she wouldn't be born into absence. That her mother might have been dismissed, but she wouldn't disappear. Not for a man who thought promises could be rerouted without consequence. And not for a nursery that had been emptied without a word. The next morning, I looked up Melissa's address. I knew it from before, from early stories, old photos, vague mentions during the get-to-know-you phase when I was still trying to piece together his past without appearing insecure. He had said they didn't talk often. Said they weren't close. Just cordial. That word had always struck me as off, too polished. Too neutral for someone he shared years with. I hadn't planned to go over there. But after what he said the night before, after seeing him move around the house like nothing had happened, like I was the one making things difficult, I realized I needed to look her in the eye. Not to accuse her. Not to blame her. But to see what kind of story he was telling her. Because I was starting to believe he wasn't just rewriting the story for me. He was rewriting it for everyone. When she opened the door, she looked surprised to see me. Not guilty, just confused. Her eyes dropped to my stomach, then back to my face. She didn't smile. "Hi," I said, voice tight. I'm James's wife." She paused, stepped out onto the porch, arms crossed. "Okay. I'm sorry to just show up like this," I said quickly. "But I needed to ask you something. He said he gave you some money recently. From our nursery fund." Her brow furrowed. "Nursery?" I nodded. "I'm due in a month. We were saving for the baby's room. He said you needed the money more." Something shifted in her expression, not shame, but something close to regret. She exhaled slowly, looking away for a second before speaking. "I told him I was behind on rent. I didn't ask for anything. I was venting. He offered. Said it wasn't a big deal. That you were okay with it." The last part stung. "I didn't even know you were pregnant," she added softly. "He never mentioned it." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "He never mentioned I was pregnant?" She shook her head. "Not once. I thought you two weren't having kids. That's what he told me when we split." "That was 4 years ago," I said. "I know," she said. "He still checks in. Says he's just making sure I'm okay." I assumed that was just guilt, you know? There was no malice in her tone. Just the weary honesty of someone who's been through her own version of disappointment and no longer has the energy to sugarcoat anything. I sat down on the porch step. She didn't ask me to come in, and I didn't want to. I needed the air. Needed space between what I was hearing and the weight it was pressing down on me. She sat too, after a minute. Quiet. Then she said, "He always liked being the hero. The one who shows up with just enough money, just enough charm, to make you forget how much he withheld when it really counted." That's when I realized something I hadn't admitted even to myself. This wasn't just about the nursery. It was about a man who still thought of himself as someone women relied on, not because he earned their trust, but because he knew exactly when to hand out just enough support to keep them loyal. He hadn't chosen his child. He hadn't chosen me. He'd chosen the version of himself that felt needed. When I stood to leave, Melissa looked at me and said, "If I had known what that money was for, I would have mailed it back. I don't need it more than your baby does." I nodded. And for the first time, I believed her. Not because she owed me anything, but because she had already lost the version of him I was only now discovering didn't really exist. I didn't confront him right away. I think that surprised even me. But something had shifted after speaking to Melissa. She hadn't defended herself. She hadn't tried to protect him. In fact, she'd seemed more disappointed than anything, like someone who had already read the final chapter and pitted me for still being on the first page. So I went home, and instead of speaking, I started digging. There's a strange clarity that comes when you stop trying to protect the version of someone you love. Suddenly, things you once explained away, "He's tired, he forgot, he's just being private," start to reorganize themselves into something colder. More deliberate. I pulled out the old bank statements. Not just the recent ones, but from over the past 2 years. I opened up his old phone backups, the ones he thought I didn't know how to access. I cross-checked travel receipts, messages, even those innocuous little Cash App transfers labeled miscellaneous. And slowly, the truth came into focus. It hadn't started with the nursery money. That was just the first time he touched something sacred, something we had named, protected, hoped over. But before that, there had been small withdrawals. $40 here. $120 there. Gas, groceries, late invoice. Always vague. Always justifiable. Until I followed the trail. The grocery charge from 3 months ago? Sent the same day Melissa's internet bill was due. The $500 emergency car repair withdrawal? A cash deposit into her account, time-stamped within the same hour. But what froze me wasn't the money. It was the messages. You know I'll always take care of you. I told her you were fine, that I've got it. She's just stressed. The baby stuff is making her a little irrational. The baby stuff. That's what he called the child I was growing. That's what he called the name we had picked out. The late-night kicks. The heartbeat we listened to together in the doctor's office. The baby stuff. An inconvenience. A phase. I closed the laptop slowly, set it aside. My hands weren't shaking. I wasn't crying. It was the calmest I'd felt in days. Because now, I wasn't confused anymore. He hadn't made a mistake. He hadn't been guilt-tripped. He had made a series of choices, quiet ones, calculated ones. All while smiling at me across the dinner table and asking if I wanted more mashed potatoes. He never gave up his old life. He just folded me into it. Gave me just enough light to keep growing roots, while he watered something else behind my back. I walked into the nursery room. Still empty. The paint swatches looked stupid now, like stickers in a child's scrapbook. I pulled them down, one by one, and let them fall to the floor. Then I picked up my notebook. The one where I had written down measurements and quotes and ideas. On the last page, I started a new list. Not of things to buy, but of things to take. My name was on the lease. My parents had offered to help more than once. And there was still time before the due date. Just enough time to rewrite the ending he thought he controlled. He had invested in nostalgia. In an ex who remembered who he used to be. I was investing in a future. And he wouldn't be part of it. He came home that evening humming. Not loudly, just under his breath. Something familiar, an old tune he used to play when he was cooking on Sundays or folding laundry in the other room. A casual, everyday kind of hum. The sound of a man who believed the world was in order. That his lies were still working. That I was still asleep beneath them. I didn't stop him at the door. I let him change clothes. Heat up leftovers. Set his phone on the counter and scroll through it like nothing had changed. I watched from the hallway, just outside the kitchen's view, my hand resting lightly on the edge of the wall. I wanted to see him as he was when he thought no one was looking. Relaxed. In control. Unaware. Then I stepped in. We need to talk. He looked up, mildly annoyed. Now? Yes. He sighed, set the spoon down in the pot. If this is still about the money. It is, I interrupted. But not the way you think. He raised an eyebrow. Okay. I took a breath. Pulled the folder out from under my arm and laid it on the kitchen table. What's this? Bank statements. Transfers. Messages. Receipts. My voice was calm. Unshaken. Proof. Of everything. He glanced at it, then back at me. That flicker of panic crossed his face, quick, but there. A crack in the performance. You've been spying on me, he asked, suddenly defensive. No, I said, I've been waking up. He scoffed, tried to laugh. Melissa said she needed help. I was just being decent. You weren't just being decent, I said. You were playing savior. You were using my trust, and our child's future, to keep your past on a leash. He stepped back. That's not fair. You told her I was irrational. That I didn't work. That I didn't even mind. His mouth opened, then shut. The words he had ready no longer worked in this room. I'm pregnant, I said quietly. I'm building a life. And all this time, you were feeding another one behind my back, not because she needed you, but because you needed to feel needed. That's not true, he said, but it was too late. His voice had lost all weight. He sounded like a boy cornered in a lie that had finally lost its legs. I talked to her, I added. She didn't know I was pregnant. She didn't even know we had a nursery fund. His jaw tightened. She said if she had known, she would have mailed the money back. She's lying, he snapped. No, I said. She's just not lying anymore. There was a long pause. He stared at the folder but didn't open it. Just kept standing there, eyes darting around the room like it could offer him some way out. I gave up everything for us, he said finally. My freedom, my time, my... You gave up nothing, I said. You kept a back door open. And you funneled your guilt into it while I was painting walls and folding onesies alone. He looked at me like I was someone new. Maybe I was. I'm leaving, I said. The lease is in my name. I've already spoken to my parents. The nursery will be built, but not here. And not with you. He didn't shout. Didn't beg. He just stood there, stunned that the mask had cracked and there was no one rushing to fix it. I turned and walked down the hallway. Past the empty nursery. Past the home we'd built on uneven ground. And into a room filled not with paint or furniture, but with quiet, steady resolve. I wasn't raising my child in a house built on borrowed loyalty. I was done being second to a version of himself he couldn't let go of. The next morning, I didn't wait for him to leave for work. I had already started. The drawers were half emptied. My files, my notebooks, my prenatal vitamins, the baby journal, I had packed them all into boxes while the light was still blue outside. I didn't feel rushed. I didn't feel afraid. Just precise. Like someone finally operating in their own timeline. He stood at the door, half-dressed, watching me from the hallway. So this is it? I didn't look up. No. This is the beginning. He scoffed quietly. You're overreacting. I paused at the box I was sealing. You took money from our child and gave it to someone else without telling me. That's not overreaction. That's consequence. He stepped closer, arms crossed. You don't know what it's like, being responsible for someone. For their mistakes. I couldn't just let her fall apart. I stood slowly. And what about me? What about this baby? He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The words he'd rehearsed, the ones he used to win arguments, no longer applied. Because this wasn't about feelings anymore. This was about facts. My name was on the lease. My savings, though modest, were mine alone. The nursery fund was gone, yes, but so was the illusion that we were on the same side. He left that morning after a shallow apology and a weak promise to talk later. But I didn't wait for later. I spent the next few hours calling my parents, arranging the moving van, setting up the basics at their guest house. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe. And it was mine. Later that evening, I met with a lawyer. She was calm, efficient. When I told her what had happened, she nodded slowly, without judgment. This is more common than people realize, she said. But you're ahead of it. You still have control. We talked about custody. About financial boundaries. About how to protect what little I had left. She walked me through the paperwork with kindness but clarity. I signed each page without hesitation. Not out of anger, but out of resolve. Over the next few days, I prepared the move. Quietly. No fanfare. No drama. I packed what mattered and left the rest. I didn't erase myself from that house, I just removed the version of me who waited for someone else's permission to act. On my last day there, I stood in the empty nursery one final time. The walls were still bare. No crib. No mobile. No color. But in my arms, I held a box labeled New Start. Inside it were ultrasound pictures, baby socks, and the soft cloud wallpaper I had originally picked out. I had folded it carefully. I was still going to use it. Just not in this house. And not with that man. He called that night. Twice. Left a voicemail asking if I could be reasonable. He didn't ask about the baby. He didn't ask if I was okay. Just asked why I was doing this so close to the due date. Because I had waited long enough. Because a child deserves to be born into a home built on truth, not guilt. And because I would rather raise this baby in a guest room filled with love than in a house with an empty nursery and a man full of excuses. I was no longer a secondary character in his drama. I was building something real. And he wouldn't get to script it. The room was smaller than I imagined her first room would be. The wallpaper didn't quite stretch across the wall. I had to patch it near the window, and if you looked too closely, you could see where the clouds didn't line up. But the light that poured in each morning made everything else feel irrelevant. The crib was simple. The mobile handmade. The dresser was an old one from my parents' attic that I repainted during long, quiet afternoons. I couldn't afford everything we had originally planned, but none of that mattered anymore. The room wasn't perfect. But it was real. And it was ours. The day I brought her home, I remember standing in the doorway, holding her against my chest, and whispering, "You're safe now." She blinked up at me, unaware of the mess that had preceded her arrival, but somehow, that made it better. She wasn't inheriting the weight of my past. She was starting from something lighter. Something clean. My parents didn't ask too many questions. They gave me space, helped when I needed it, and most importantly, they didn't offer pity. Only support. My father fixed the old rocking chair. My mother cooked more food than I could eat. It wasn't glamorous, but it was grounding. I saw him once. 2 weeks after she was born. He showed up unannounced, holding a small bouquet and a forced smile. I didn't invite him in. We sat on the front steps while my daughter slept inside, her monitor quietly flashing in my lap. "I just wanted to see her," he said. "You'll have to go through the schedule," I replied, nodding to the folder I had handed his lawyer. He looked around, like he was assessing the place. Maybe he expected chaos. Or weakness. What he saw instead was calm. A life he no longer had access to. "I still care about you," he said. I nodded. "But you didn't protect us." He looked down. "I made a mistake." "No," I said. "You made a choice. More than once." He didn't argue. Maybe he was tired. Or maybe he finally understood that I wasn't asking for an apology. I wasn't even asking for him to change. I just didn't need him anymore. When he left, I didn't watch him go. I turned back to the monitor. My daughter had started to stir, one tiny hand reaching into the air, her fingers curling softly in the half-light of the room. I walked back inside and picked her up, pressing my lips to her forehead. She smelled like lavender and milk and something else, something that felt like a beginning. The house was quiet again. Not heavy, not uncertain. Just quiet. I sat in the rocking chair and looked at the room around us. The patched wallpaper. The hand-sewn quilt. The sunlight filtering through gauzy curtains. Everything in this room had been chosen, earned, built slowly with care. No one had gifted it. No one had filled it for me. And in that, it became more than a nursery. It became proof. Proof that you don't need someone else's permission to start over. That betrayal doesn't end you. And that sometimes, the best thing you can give your child isn't a perfect home, but a mother who knows how to leave one that wasn't. She fell asleep against my chest, her breath warm and even. And for the first time in months, I did too. Not because things were fixed. But because we were finally free.